Hello and welcome back to the Ultra Films YouTube channel. My name is Evan. I am the producer here over at this show, and today I'm helping Dylan out. He's covering Stranger Things Season 4. However, there's so many episodes in this that we got dropped all at once. As you can see down in that bottom corner over there, on May 27th, just a few days ago, last week basically, they dropped the entire first 7 episodes, and all of them are very long. Now, Dylan already broke down episode 1. This week I'm breaking down episode 2. Next week we'll kind of do the same thing. He's breaking down 3, I'm doing 4, and then he should be able to do 5, 6, 7 up until July 1st, and then he'll be able to cover 8, and then we're going to do a big ol' episode covering 9. So I just wanted to clear the air. I'm not going to be covering this full series, but I am covering this episode 4 and then part of a bigger recap and discussion on episode 9, the finale. I also want to say, because this isn't my series, but I love the show, is this season is incredible. Super well done. Top notch. But let's key in on this episode. So this is episode 2, Vecna's Curse. Obviously, spoilers for the episode. We start out with Hopper on the railing and the machine about to explode, and he jumps off the ledge, and that's how you find out how he survives. And then he is all scarred up, all beat up, but he climbs back up the ladder, except the Russians are there, waiting for him, investigating the damages down there, and they take him to Russia. You find out that's how he's in Russia. Obviously, we got that package for Joyce the episode prior, but this just shows how he actually survived the explosion. And I think it's kind of silly that they didn't check to see if he was still down there. It's such a there's a ledge there. You didn't think to I don't know. Anyways, I think it's funny. But then yeah, it cuts to him doing the labor on the railroad, and he's like gives that look over his shoulder, panning towards the camera, or panning away from the camera, and it's pretty badass. But you find out he's still alive. He is actually over there. It's not just some ruse. So then, back in Hawkins, Chrissy was just murdered, and Max saw some of what went down the night before. She goes outside hearing sirens, like lots of sirens approaching the trailer park, and sees all these cops roll up on Eddie's trailer, or Eddie's uncle's trailer. It's not his. But they roll up. His uncle's outside smoking and talks to the police about, hey, I have no idea what happened. I don't know this girl. I swear. I have no idea what happened here. It's unexplainable. And briefly the door is open. You can see Chrissy's body on the floor all mangled, and Max sees it and gets freaked out and runs away. She goes looking for Dustin, weirdly enough. You'd think that she'd go for Lucas, but her and Lucas are kind of at odds, which we knew about. She's been pushing him away ever since Billy died. But anyways, she goes and finds Dustin to talk about the possibility of it being something from the Upside Down. I don't know why I froze there. I forgot what the Upside Down was for a second. But anyways, so Max thinks it's something from the Upside Down, but they're confused because they thought the gate was closed and that there was no way for that to happen. However, there's still something from the underground attacking Hawkins. So they start to theorize. They figure out that the only way they can really know what happened for sure to Chrissy and what happened to her body was if they asked Eddie, who was there, and they showed the flashback scene to the night before with Max watching the lights flicker as she's watching television late at night, and then she looks out the window and Eddie runs out and gets in a car and drives away. So she knows something sketchy's going on. They decide to go look for him, and they start checking in on references. I'll come back to that arc. We cut kind of again back out towards I forget what city 11 and Will and Joyce all moved to, some weird city, but we cut back out to where they're at. Mike has flown in to hang out with 11 for spring break, and Murray has also just happened to fly out there, so you see him getting into a cab at the airport. But Mike meets up with 11. 11 starts telling him how great things have been, even though they have not been. We saw Angela bullying her in the first episode, so things are not good in this new town. But she's pretending like things are good. She's trying to fit in, and it causes lots of tension actually between her and Mike ultimately, because things go south very quickly later in this episode for them. But also Murray's there because Joyce called about the package, so then they're going to start investigating, figuring out what to do. They're ultimately going to call that number that's on the little paper from Enzo, and so it's just a lot of stuff going down all over the place all season. It's very fast paced. I think Dylan probably has said that too many times, and he's going to continue saying it through the rest of his reviews and breakdowns. But it's fast paced, but it's like fast paced because it needs to be. There's so much storytelling going on. It's fantastic. Like, there's just so much depth going into, like, so much development going into every single character interaction is great. I love it. And that's what they do great with this series. Anyways, so yeah, they call the Enzo number and talk to what they don't know currently, but they talk to some man on the phone. He says, yes, he's alive. I can promise you that, and I can get you him if you give me 40,000 American dollars. And they go, what the heck? Are you kidding me? Which is a lot of money, because you have to think about this. This is the 80s. This isn't current time. 40,000 is still a lot in current time. That's way more. I don't know what it is adjusted for inflation back to the 80s, but that's a lot of money. That's like asking for like $1 million sort of thing. I feel like that maybe the actual translation is like 40,000 back then was like asking for $1 million. Right now, 40,000 is like a little bit above average salary in the United States, or maybe close to average salary. Anyways, so while they're making that call, the kids are actually out. So Mike, Will, and 11 are actually out at Rinkomania, and this is where things start to go south for 11. She is there trying to just have a good time, and then Angela shows up, being Angela as we know her, starts causing trouble. She comes up and bothers 11 in front of Mike. Mike is unsuspecting because he thinks that they're friends, and so he even says to Angela, hey, yeah, I've heard so much about you. You guys I heard you're friends with 11. That's awesome. And Will's sitting there going, dude, no, this girl is a freaking menace to society, and she hates 11. You need to not let her go out there. But Angela ends up dragging her out. Will tries to stop it, and he gets up all frustrated, and Mike goes, what are you on about? Like, what's the big deal? And then they drag 11 out there to skate. They throw her in the middle of the rink, blast her with a spotlight, and then start playing a song, making fun of her, laughing at her, and then ultimately they throw, I think, a chocolate shake on her, just to embarrass her. And she, Mike is trying to get them to cut the music, and ultimately the DJ cuts the music on his own, terms when they're about to splash her with a shake to add effect to it. And like when the music stops, that's when, oh, this isn't just yeah. Very, very, very good use of soundtrack in this whole series as well. I am pretty blown away. I haven't seen soundtrack done this well, like outside of maybe stuff that James Gunn does. James Gunn does really good stuff with his soundtracks, how he picks music for like Peacemaker, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Suicide Squad. All those are all really good examples. If you want to go watch those, we've covered some of that stuff on the channel here. He does a fantastic job with his soundtracks. This is pretty up there as well. They have really good song choices, and everything just seamless, it seems. So anyways, yeah, Angela ruins Elle's day. She gets pissed off, rolls off the rink, and then ultimately bumps into Angela again, I think. And Angela starts, she's talking to Mike and Will. They're trying to calm her down, and then Angela comes up and says something else, and 11 gets mad at it. She grabs a skate. Actually, I don't think they're talking to her. I think that she just like got off the rink. Angela got off right around the same time, said something she didn't like. She grabbed a skate, went up, and bonked her right on the face, just straight here, and she starts bleeding. And 11 starts having flashbacks, which she's already sort of had these nightmares in the first episode, where she's like remembering what happened in the Hawkins lab, and all of the other dead children, numbered children, so 2 through 10 were all dead, and she thinks she killed them all. So she's like having this flashback to, oh my god, I'm such a monster, I killed all these children, it's all my fault, I'm a monster, sort of thing. And she says that to Mike, and as this thing is escalating about how she doesn't want to feel different, she doesn't want to look different, and Mike reassures her that he loves her and that he actually really appreciates who she is underneath the superpowers, and that like that's why he wants, and also that like the superpower thing is not, doesn't make her less of a person. It makes her, it's one of her best qualities as well. So he tries to reassure her, but they had like their real first fight, is what he says to Will. And so ultimately the police show up though and have to lock up 11. They take her to jail because of the assault, and so she gets taken away in a police van. Mike and Will and Jonathan try and track her down at the police station and get her set free. However, they still drive off with her. That's pretty much the end of that story. The last, I just went straight through their stuff. It cuts back and forth between a couple of the other things we'll talk about, but the end of that in this episode is her, a bunch of vehicles coming and stopping the police van, and it's actually Papa who is breaking her free. Actually, it's not Papa. It's not revealed that it's him yet. It's the other scientist that is pretty chill. He stops the police van, keeps her from getting arrested, and then takes her to a diner to like talk about things, and ultimately flies her off in a helicopter to go to a lab. We later learn that the Nina project is there, which is like I won't get into that. That's for future episodes. I'll let Dylan talk about that. But then back in Hawkins again, Lucas and the basketball team are playing a game that night, and oh wait, no, they played the game the night before, I'm sorry. So it's the next morning. They had played the game, they celebrated, got drunk. Lucas was hung over. They were all hanging out in an abandoned house or something like that. Chrissy's boyfriend is the captain of the team. His name's Jason, and Jason is kind of like the ringleader of this little, it's almost more cultish than the Hellfire Club, ironically, and they're trying to paint the Hellfire Club as a like cult. But they're out doing, their thing, drinking. They're all underage because they're all high school students. But anyways, they play their game, win, celebrate. The next morning, the cops pull up to check in on them because apparently what's crazy is the cops knew they were there. I don't know if they went to go talk to Jason's parents first and then they sent them there knowing he'd be there or what. It's not explained. That's probably the most likely possibility, is they were just checking in on leads, wanting to see where Jason was. He was here. All the guys can confirm that he was there all night. Obviously, we know who the real killer is, but the cops are there to interrogate him and figure out what was going on. They asked if he had seen Christy, and he goes, no. Or Chrissy, I'm sorry, not Christy. Chrissy. And he goes, no. And then they start asking if she used drugs. He is bewildered over the fact that she would never, ever use something like that. She's not that kind of person, even though he is. And so he tells them, no, absolutely not. And then they go, well, do you know anything about her and Eddie Munson? Because she was apparently at his place last night. And he goes, is she okay? What did that freak do to her? And the cops ultimately can't tell him anything because it's an active investigation. But he automatically has implied that Chrissy's dead and that Eddie Munson is the cause and he's the murderer. Which he hasn't been a part of any of the other, storylines. This is his first, role or appearance in the show. So he has no idea how demonic Hawkins really is and what's really going on at all. He just assumes that Eddie Munson is some Satanist who's killing people with rituals. And that's just not the case. If he had seen Chrissy's body or knew what the cops knew, he'd know better. But, so he gets the basketball team all riled up to chase down Eddie Munson, find him, and murder him. So they start going on a search to look for Eddie. They check in on a bunch of people. They check in on Eddie's friends, his band, really, to see where ultimately he's at. They don't really get a ton of answers for him other than that Dustin was looking for him. So then they start looking after Dustin. They go to check in Dustin's house and they knock on his front door. Lucas ends up going into his room and trying to call Dustin on his walkie and say, hey, yo, you gotta watch out. I'm with Jason and they're looking for you right now. They're looking for Eddie. And I don't remember if that goes through necessarily. I don't think it does. Things start progressing. This is I think this might even be drifting into episode 3 a little bit, so I'm gonna slow down. But what starts happening is obviously Dustin's looking for Eddie. So he goes to Family Video where Robin and Steve work, and they just invade the store and use the phone and database to start, or the phones mostly, to call all of Eddie's friends. And some of them said that somebody who knew Eddie said that he might be at Reefer Rick's, who used to be his dealer, and that he was locked up. I don't know if they specified that he was locked up, but just that he might be out at Reefer Rick's. So they ultimately go, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good lead. We should check that out. But we have no idea who Reefer Rick is. He's just some legend. And ultimately, they look through the database at Family Video, find all the different people named Rick, and check each one. They give some really funny, stereotypical, people that would order, certain genres of movies that, don't seem like a drug dealer. And then they get to Reefer Rick's. Man, I'm trying to remember what movies they had listed for him. But they were super cliche, it was The Godfather and something else that he had checked out. And you're like, yep, that's the guy. They didn't even check the rest of the names. They're just like, yep, him. We're going to go to his address. So they go and check it out. They find him there. Or they don't find him in the house. So then I think Steve notices a shed in the back. It might actually be Max. One of the two of them sees the shed out back, and they're like, wait a minute, let's go out here. So then they go check out the shed. They're looking around. Nothing seems like there's anybody there. And then Steve's poking in the boat where there's like a tarp covering it, and he's like, "You rip it off." To Dustin, he's like, if you're so brave, why don't you rip it off? It doesn't feel like there's anything in there. And then all of a sudden, Eddie pops out and has a switchblade right at Steve's neck. And they start to ask him whether or not he has seen, not whether or not, but what the heck did he see and what the heck was going on. And he basically says, "You won't believe me if I tell you." And the kids go, "Yeah, we will, try us." Like, we've seen some crazy stuff. And then they basically tell him straight up, like, hey, Hawkins is like straight up haunted. There's something superficial, or not superficial, superstitious, I don't know what you want to call it. There's the upside down exists, and they don't tell him all the details right away. It takes them a bit to explain it, but they essentially tell him, look, like, there's some crazy things going on in this town. All the kids disappearing, the mall fire, we were there, we know what really happened, try us. And so he explains himself. He talks about her body just floating out of nowhere, just all of a sudden dismemberment. I don't know if that's what you can call it, because that's losing limbs, but like her arms snapping, legs snapping, eyes popping out of her head, and then just dying right then and there. So they get their explanation, deduce that, okay, that has got to be something from the upside down, but it doesn't make sense because there's not a gate anywhere for anything to come through. They shut the only one that they thought was open, which was back at Hawkins' lab, and so they thought it was completely closed. However, it's seemingly not. So they have to figure out why that's the case, and that's the big mystery of this season, is how the heck is there still a gate open? Who opened it? Who opened it and how? Which we ultimately get in episode 7, which will be reviewed by Dylan in a few weeks, so you'll see it then. But till then, they're just testing out and trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and how to figure out how to clear Eddie's name mostly, and prove that it was. They ultimately name drop Vecna, as, you know, because they just played D&D the other night before. This is how they always set up their villains, is they make it D&D based. So they were just playing against Vecna, an evil wizard who can cast spells and apparently across different dimensions, and they are certain that it's him. And so even though I'm sure if you watched our episode 1 breakdown and review, that you know that Vecna isn't D&D wise the same as what we see here, but Dylan will probably explain more of that in that episode, and then everything else. But that's just what they use to. They need something tangible to grasp onto, to be like, okay, we need to understand this. So that's what they end up doing. And so it's kind of, you kind of go, okay, who is this Vecna guy? Why is he terrorizing children? What the heck's going on? And how do we kill him and clear Eddie's name? Because it's a big old task, and it seems almost impossible to them. So lots of stuff up in the air after this episode, but at least they know kind of who or what's behind it, and even though they can't see it, and then they know what they need to figure out in order to at least make a push to take this thing out. So it's kind of crazy because the 4 or 5 of them, if you count Eddie, are the only ones who are going after Vecna. You have Hopper, Joyce, Murray over doing stuff, Murray and Joyce are trying to free Hopper, who's over in Russia, so they're going to be busy doing that. And then you have Lucas, who's not with the group because he's with the basketball players. And then you have Mike, Eleven, and Will over in another state. So everything's and on top of all that, Eleven doesn't have her power, so she can't really help here. So there's just like a lot of uncertainty and this big, huge threat. It's a lot to deal with. The only other piece I think I have missed from this episode is also towards the very beginning, Nancy and Fred from the paper, they end up deciding to go investigate what's going on as well. So they're split up from everybody else, but they go to the trailer park to do journalism work, just to try and get a story for the paper about what really happened, because the small journalists have this like big old grand idea of how the world should look and wanting to change it through their writing. That's kind of Nancy's whole shtick. And so Nancy and Fred go to the trailer park and are going to investigate it. As they approach the park, the police officer that stops them starts saying crazy things to Fred, and he's hallucinating. He's just bugging out. And you're like, whoa, what the heck? That is not normal. And you get kind of worried for both of them in the car until you realize it's just Fred hallucinating, and the cop's trying to talk to him, and he's just zoned out completely. They get into the park, and then ultimately you hear this clock going off, and Fred's the only one that hears it, and he goes into the woods to investigate it. Same thing that happened to Chrissy the episode before. She started hearing this clock as she met up with Eddie in the woods. And so you go, oh no, this is not good. But Fred goes out into the woods, sees the clock. He basically, you saw Vecna already in the first episode, but he briefly sees Vecna, and he starts talking to him about how horrible he is. Basically, Vecna's just trying to dig into the thing that caused you the most trauma and scare the frick out of you. But he ends up chasing him, starts to chase him, and Fred runs back through the woods and out onto the street, and then he sees a vision of the car accident he caused last season in season 3, and starts to flip his he just goes crazy. And I mean, not really, but he freaks out. He starts walking towards it a little bit, and then Vecna grabs a hold of him psychically, I believe, because I mean, he's like reaching out to him as the child who was in the car accident. But basically, that's when he possesses him, pulls him up into the sky, breaks all his limbs, pulls his eyeballs out, and he falls dead on the floor. And then the next morning, the police find the body. But that's Vecna's second victim. Unrelated. I mean, Eddie's nowhere nearby this, so it doesn't. I mean, it's sort of near the trailer park, but they haven't found Eddie. They've been doing a search for him, obviously, since he's the main suspect. And so they technically are going to tie Fred to this, to Eddie as well, even though there's really no way to connect the dots there. It's beyond the police's comprehension. If it was Hopper, obviously not, but Hopper's not here. So they try and still keep it under wraps, obviously, the next morning, but that's kind of the end of the episode, is them showing up. Actually, no, that's creeping into season 3. The next morning is episode 3, I'm sorry. So that's the end of the episode, is Fred being murdered by Vecna, being the second victim, and then there's just so much more afterwards. There's a lot left in this season. There's literally 5 more episodes that we have to cover. You'll see 3 and 4 next week on Wednesday, and then again on Saturday is when we're dropping 3 and then 4, and then on Wednesday the following week you'll get 5, then 6, 7 the following weeks after that. And then ultimately that, I think, let me look at the schedule here, that's 3, 4, 5, 6, or 5, 6, 7. Then on that Friday after we drop the review for 7, it'll be a perfect recap because you get it 2 days before they drop volume 2, which is episodes 8 and 9. So then we'll do a review on the following Wednesday for 8, and then do a big old video on the 9th, so like a week after, for the finale. So that's kind of the schedule that we're on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this breakdown. It's super, super long. I haven't done a breakdown this long in a really long time, but there's so much going on in this show. It's just insane. It's super fast paced too. So if I miss stuff, I apologize. Let me know in the comments what you thought about episode 2, what you thought about Fred freaking out in the middle of the road. Let me know what you think about Vecna's choice of victims so far. Obviously, if you want to talk about the whole entire season, don't spoil the rest of the season in the comments section, but join our Discord, which will be in the description. You can also add us on social media and, leave some questions there if you would like to, about the ultimate, arc of the season and what's going on with Vecna, because we're more than happy to answer that, but we just don't want other people to have it spoiled if they haven't watched all the way through. I don't know necessarily if that would be the case. I think most people probably binged it, but just in case, you never know. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that for this episode. Leave us a like, don't forget to subscribe. We appreciate all that support, and we will see you when we review episode 3. Until then, peace.